I come back. I have been seeing a lot of Joburg slander. Not on my watch. There's an attack on the family unit in Johannesburg. And I'm just sitting here thinking, which Johannesburg are these people living in? Please bear in mind that this is coming from a single mom of two who's lived in different places, who has opted and chosen to live in Johannesburg out of all the places I could have lived in. Hi beloveds, welcome back to my channel. It has been, it's been a long time. But hence I commit to every other week. I think in another video I'll explain why it's been so long, but for the purpose of today's video, hi everybody, happy Sunday, happy new week. Some people start their week officially on a Sunday, and for those who'll be watching on a Monday, I hope this is going to be a beautiful week ahead and a light and easy week ahead. As I'm saying this, I'm wishing the same for myself. It's been a heavy couple of weeks. You know what, for today, for the purpose of today's video, let's get straight into it. You can see from the title. I have been seeing a lot of Joburg slander. Not on my watch. Disclaimer, before I get into today's video, I moved to Johannesburg, officially, sort of moved back to Johannesburg officially at the beginning of this year. However, that was not my first introduction to this province, not my first introduction to the city. I have lived here in pockets at different stages of my life, and I have a lot of family that's based here. So aside from actually living here and getting a sense of the day-to-day, I've visited this city specifically often. And obviously, if you have an experience of a place versus somebody who's coming here for the first time, there is going to be some kind of bias based on that experience. And so as you watch this, please consider that everything I'm saying comes from the perspective of somebody who has experienced the city in different phases, and obviously that has informed how I feel about it. So I think these are the things to bear in mind before moving to Johannesburg. I've seen a lot of chat discourse unpacking about how Joburg is anti-family, about how Joburg there's an attack on the family unit in Johannesburg, about how the lifestyle in Johannesburg isn't oriented towards families, how people are not warm. And I'm just sitting here thinking, which Johannesburg are these people living in? Because that's definitely not my experience. So first things first, first thing to bear in mind if you're coming to Johannesburg, Johannesburg is massive. It is a big city comparatively to most South African metropolitan cities. And I know that there's often a comparison between Cape Town and Johannesburg. Johannesburg is by far much bigger than Cape Town. So obviously, in terms of movement, accessibility of places, spaces, people, that is obviously affected. For example, I do think that if you're coming to Joburg, you need to be very intentional about building community. This ties into another point I'll make in the video. You have to be intentional about it, because unlike in the EC, in the Eastern Cape, or maybe even KZN, that community building process isn't as organic, because your neighbor isn't just going to come and knock on your door, because it is so urbanized. I mean, the reason why Johannesburg, or one of the reasons why Johannesburg even exists, is because people were seeking opportunities. They left. Urbanization is at the core here. They left their homes, quote unquote, and built new homes here. Some were displaced, whole other chat. But the point is, this place is massive. And so if you want to have community, you need to be intentional about building the community. What that looks like, a person needs to decide for themselves. Is that through hobbies? Is that through work? If you've cultivated relationships at work that are wholesome and organic enough for you to want to lean into them even outside of work? Is it through church? Is it through friends who are based here, who then can introduce you to others? You have to just be far more intentional about that in the city. And I feel like as a 33-year-old adult, that doesn't necessarily only apply to Johannesburg. I think I've had to purposefully and intentionally cultivate community. And so I'm in the practice of doing that. If you're not in the practice of doing that, if you're coming from a city, e.g. Cape Town, where you have your set core friends that you made in a certain era of your life, and they have sort of journeyed with you into another era called adulthood, and you haven't necessarily had to intentionally think about, oh, if this shifts and changes, how do I cultivate community? yes, you're going to struggle a little bit more to settle in Johannesburg because you're going to have a feeling of people are distant, it's so far and hard to reach people, etc., etc. But I can confidently say that has never been my experience, and I often speak to people and connect with people, and I don't think that's most people's experience. And this brings me to my second point. I think Johannesburg has some of the best and interesting people. You know, it feels to me like a melting pot, people coming from all walks of life, all shapes and sizes, colors, you name it, in South Africa, who have come here for different reasons. I've found that there's an openness here. It's a vibrant city, and that happens anywhere, you know, any metropolitan city that I've ever lived in, where people are coming from different walks of life. There is a vibrantness, there's an openness, and there's a fast-pacedness here. People are here to hustle, based on what I said earlier. People are coming here seeking opportunity. You know, the same way that people speak about New York and it being the city to make it, I do feel like a lot of people, that resonates with a lot of people when it comes to Johannesburg as well. People are here to seek opportunity. They want to connect, they want to network, whether that be professionally or personally and or otherwise. So I find that in an attempt to cultivate community, because you're met with an openness of the people generally or mostly across the board, that kind of meets you halfway if you're open and willing. And obviously people are different, and if you're a little bit more to yourself, I do think there are people in Johannesburg that you could meet who are similar. I don't think that in order to thrive and be happy in the city, you need to be extroverted, you need to be outgoing, you need to be out there. But yes, I do think you need to be intentional and sort of meet that, whatever that is, in this case, community building, connecting with people. You need to meet it halfway with something. So I, against popular belief, I do not think Johannesburg is a hard city or a city filled with cold people, or people who aren't open to connecting with others. Another thing to bear in mind, which I don't know how to feel about this, if you're coming to Johannesburg and you have a family or you want to build a family, please bear in mind that this is coming from a single mom of two who's lived in different places, who has opted and chosen to live in Johannesburg out of all the places I could have lived in. I don't have the belief that Johannesburg isn't family oriented, but I don't know the people who say that, what those experiences are rooted in. And this is not for me to water down those experiences. My experience has been the complete opposite. I do think that based on where you choose to live, Johannesburg has pockets in the city which are extremely family oriented, actually far more than I think people think. We currently live in the West Rand. It's very green. There's a lot of activities you can do with kids, a lot of good schools. You really can have a wholesome life here with children. Take the walks, if you're an outdoorsy person, do the outdoorsy activities. If you're a person who's into the arts, there's plenty. There's plenty of spaces you can go with or without your children, not just in the West Rand, but really anywhere in Johannesburg. In the South, we've gone even to city center with the children. So I don't have this experience. But then again, maybe what I'm looking for as a mom may be different than what someone else is looking for in terms of raising their children. What I'm looking for and what made the move back to Johannesburg easy for me was that I wanted a city that, firstly, I wanted my children to grow up in South Africa. I did want them to have that grounding in this country. That was the first thing. The second thing is where that grounding needed to be was rooted in my children needed to grow up in a place where they can see people who look like themselves far more than they don't. So the majority of the people needed to be Black, African. It was important to me. Attached to that, it was important to me that my children grow up in a place where they see themselves in different shapes and sizes. I did not want my children to have an experience of being the absolute minority everywhere. Granted, there are going to be spaces where they are the minority just by virtue of them being middle class, but I wanted the majority of their lived experience to be, I see people thriving. I see people who look like my mom. I see people who look like myself thriving in even the non-conventional careers and lifestyles. That was important for me, for them to be grounded in that. And then obviously the last thing was I needed my children to be able to coexist with others. So a diverse intercultural space is very important to me. Hence the moves even out of the country, leaving the country, living in Cape Town, coming back, the intentional making sure my children have access to where I come from. I think it's important for me that my children are intercultural, that they're able to navigate those spaces. They honestly will be better for it. Those are the things that were important to me. All of those things, for me, I find in Johannesburg. So I don't know what it's rooted in when people say that it's not a family-oriented place or that the family structure is under attack. I also struggle with people, maybe not people, I struggle with statements like that where people say family units are under attack or people are under attack. To speak in such absolutes without really unpacking what that means, I really struggle with it. I've often heard it in the Christian context, and if that's the case, the way that I think I've understood it, it would mean that far less people are opting to have nuclear families. If that's where that's coming from, and people feel like in Johannesburg, single moms or, homes that don't have both parents are far more prevalent, or people encourage it. As a single mom, that hasn't been my experience, that is far more encouraged here than anywhere else. If anything, I do think that based on my experience, the idea of family is shifting and changing, and people are maybe grounding that in different things. And sure, if you're living in a metropolitan city where you're encountering people from different walks of life, you're going to be met with different opinions of what that looks like, but you still have agency as a person to decide what that looks like. And whether you have more or less agency when you're living in Johannesburg versus somewhere else, I'm not convinced. This idea that the place that you live in fully 100%, 110% decides for you the choices that you're going to make. I don't know. I don't fully buy into that. As a single mom, both times, it's not like I walked into those dynamics opting to be a single mom. It was circumstantial. And then a person made the most out of the decision to sort of quote unquote dissolve the nuclear family. And also as a single mom, I also find that I'm still a family with the fathers of my children. So it's not rooted in quote unquote the conventional. And me living in Johannesburg doesn't make me lean less than maybe if I lived somewhere else. Life happened and you navigated life. So I don't know. And for people saying those things, please unpack, dissect, maybe even share in the comments what you mean, because I'm really, really struggling with this narrative. And that if you are a family looking to move to Johannesburg, I do think there's a place here for you. I do think there's a place here for your children. I do think that you can live a relatively balanced lifestyle. Obviously, what that needs to look like for you, you decide for yourself. Another thing to bear in mind when you come to Johannesburg is that, or if you're opting to move to Johannesburg is apparently, just according to statistics, it would be the most expensive city to live in South Africa. But based on the reasonable property prices in Johannesburg, that average or that stat is brought down. So it's a relatively affordable city to live in, I think, for most income brackets, especially comparatively to Cape Town. I think it would be similar or slightly more expensive than living in KZN. In comparison to what people earn on average, I do think that the income matches the lifestyle here. For example, in my case, I moved for a job, I got an increase. The amount of money, or the difference, I'm able to make and do far more than what I would have been able to do and live off in Cape Town. So the money just stretches far more here. The apartment that we live in is significantly more affordable. The school is also significantly more affordable. Again, that's a choice. I think on average, and this is just a bro believe me kind of stat, it's not based on anything that I've read up on, I get the sense based on my own expenses and income that I'm able to live a relatively okay life here comparatively to my income. I do think that the money stretches. So I do think it's a city that's affordable across the board, whether you're single, whether you have a family, etc. And of course, these things are always subjective based on people's preference. I get the sense that the climb here, climbing up the career ladder happens at a far faster pace, purely based on my own experience and the experience of my peers. That's definitely been the case. When I moved to Johannesburg in 2017, the first time, I mean, what was I earning? Without getting into the figures, I stayed in Johannesburg for 5 years, and by the time I left Johannesburg after 5 years, I was earning significantly more, if not double, borderline triple what I initially earned in the space of 5 years. And the reason for that was because I got promoted within that time at a relatively short period of time. I'm not sure if that's the case anywhere else. People who live in other cities, please do chip in. But if you bear in mind that maybe you can climb up the whatever career trajectory you're faced with in your sector versus like the lifestyle or the money stretching far more here, it's encouraging to know that you can come here with, quote unquote, low aspirations for income and find yourself climbing up the ladder pretty quickly. Of course, you need to meet that with ambition and the want to do that. Not everybody wants that. But I do feel like this city has the right sort of ingredients for people who are ambitious and people who are hustlers and people who want to make it. And then one final thing to bear in mind if you're Nguni, if you're Xhosa, Zulu or Swati speaking and you live in Johannesburg, please be prepared to encounter people on a daily basis who do not speak your language. The same way that other people who do not speak any of the Nguni language are encountered by people who don't speak the languages elsewhere, or even in the province, or even in the city. I've been called out, apparently, for having Nguni privilege. There's this perception that Ngunis exist in the world, expecting everybody to understand them. And as a Nguni speaker, I actually believe them. I think we are spoiled. Zulu is widely spoken. Out of the 3 Nguni languages, Zulu is widely spoken here in Johannesburg. Because our languages are so widely spoken, specifically is Zulu, there's a tendency for us not to be open, or at least that's the perception, for us not to be open to speak and learn other languages. And yeah, I've encountered people at the shops, wherever, where I even step out of his closet and I'm met with somebody who then speaks Isipedi, Tsonga, and whatever. And often it's fine. We can, communicate in our respective languages with our limitations without having necessarily to lean into English. But it often is a conversation starter of, yo, you Zulus, oh, you Ngunis, why do you guys always expect other people to why do you guys always expect other people to speak your languages? So please be prepared to come to the city with openness. This is not the Eastern Cape. This is not the Western Cape where the majority speak your language. This is a city where it's a mixed bag. It's a mixed bag of people. People coming from all walks of life, and they want to be met with flexibility and openness. So if you don't necessarily want to interact with people who do not speak your language, I don't know if Johannesburg is the city for you. So it does require openness, and if you're not open, yeah, I think you'll struggle with the settling in process. And I do think that this seeps into even like community building, and it seeps into relating with people at work. This is not to say we must all be 110% fluent in every language in this country, but we do live in a country with a lot of diversity. And navigating it with the expectation that diversity needs to meet you where you're at without you needing to be flexible and meet the diversity where it's at, then this city's not for you, or you're going to learn some hard lessons. So those are some of the things I just wanted to flag to people about Johannesburg, things to consider. There'll definitely be a part 2 at some point, maybe even from my children's perspective, but I think I'll leave it there for now. Have a great week and move to Johannesburg. The hype is worth it. Design. Don't believe the narrative that's online. Also, if you're going to believe the narrative that's online, ask yourself, from whose perspective is that person speaking? Same way that you should ask yourself when you watch this. All right. See you next time. Ciao.